Hello, I'm Barb Carr, and today we are going to learn how to tame our cognitive biases. When you are conducting an incident investigation, your cognitive biases can really lead you down the wrong path and to the wrong root causes. Avoiding that is not a simple matter of saying to yourself, I'm going to leave my biases out of my investigation, because there's no way we can eliminate having personal biases. It's just part of the human condition. So that's why I wanted to talk to you about how you can tame your cognitive biases so they do not have a negative effect on the work you put into your investigations. So let's start with learning a little bit about how biases are formed. As we move through this presentation, please comment down below in the comments section if you have any questions. I mentioned that biases are part of the human condition. One study suggested that more than 6,000 thoughts float through our brains every day. So the brain tries to ease the burden of this cognitive load by looking for shortcuts in thinking when we encounter situations. Our brains are designed to make quick decisions for our own survival in potentially dangerous situations. So biases help us streamline the constant flow of information we receive through our nervous system to decide what is good or bad or right or wrong. These shortcuts in thinking are referred to by psychologists as heuristics. We create heuristics based on information we gather and store in our memories as we move through our lives. Heuristics are generally accurate interpretations of reality. Generally. Think of heuristics as rules of thumb. They are usually reliable enough to make simple day-to-day decisions. You rely on heuristics to make your day-to-day decisions. If you are faced with too much information, for example, you may choose familiarity heuristic. Familiarity heuristic is when you favor the known over the unknown. For example, you're in a new city with lots of restaurant options, but you end up choosing a restaurant you are familiar with in your hometown. Have you ever been faced with so many options that you chose what was familiar, even though it may have been more fun or more interesting to try something new? Tell us about that in the comments section and share what your experiences were. Another type of heuristic is affect heuristic. Affect heuristics are impulsive decisions. You're late for a meeting and there's a traffic jam ahead, so you take an exit even though you don't know how to get to your destination from this particular exit. We use affect heuristics sometimes as a shortcut when we just don't have time to think and we need to make a very quick decision. Another example is if you don't have very much information, you may rely on representative heuristics. For example, you see someone out in public and you're guessing it's someone who is artistic because they're dressed very creatively, they're kind of quirky, they have very colorful clothes on. So you're just going to believe that they are artistic until they give you more information about who they are to disprove that. And that's a very important point to make about heuristics, because you can change your mind when you're using heuristics to make decisions. Heuristics influence our decisions and are sometimes confused with bias, but the flexibility of heuristics is one of the key differences. So let's take a look at that. Heuristics, as I said before, are generally accurate interpretations of reality. A bias is a heuristic that has gone very wrong. Biases are inaccurate interpretations of reality. Another difference is we might adjust our heuristic opinions when we are presented with logical information, but we are less likely to make any adjustments to our biased opinions, even when we are faced with logic and facts. However, because heuristics come from information we gather and store in our memories as we move through life, we need to evaluate the information is still relevant in situations we experience now. If we don't do this, An erroneous heuristic can easily become a bias. So, what is a cognitive bias? We know a heuristic gone wrong can cause a bias, but there are other things that can cause a bias too, like our personal experiences, upbringing, experiences of those very close to us who we respect, our culture, media influence, and what we're taught in our educational system. But the simple explanation of a cognitive bias is it's when we make a bad choice, but we believe with all of our heart that it's a good choice. And it's very hard to change them, and it's very hard for anyone to change our minds. And this is kind of what it looks like. We look at the world through personal biases, and that is where the facts and our personal beliefs overlap. And where they overlap is how we will see the world. Now we know a little bit about biases and how they are formed. Let's take a look at a few examples of how they can negatively impact your incident investigations. So, confirmation bias is one we see a lot of. Confirmation bias is when an investigator looks for evidence to prove or disprove his or her hypothesis of why an incident happened. And that investigator will disregard any evidence that doesn't support his assumption. So that doesn't mean that you're a bad investigator if you fall into confirmation bias, because we do it without really realizing we are doing it. An incident investigation, though, is not the same as solving a problem through scientific method. In scientific method, you start with a hypothesis and then you prove or disprove your hypothesis. But it's really important not to start your investigations with a theory or a hypothesis or an assumption. You don't know what happened until you piece the evidence together like a puzzle with solid evidence, and you can see the whole picture. Another bias that we commonly see in incident investigations is attribution bias, when we readily and quickly attribute someone's actions to their character rather than situational factors. For example, we might think a worker made a mistake because they are careless. There is a tendency to try to fix that character trait in our worker when things go wrong with some type of discipline or warning. We want to give them a character building moment instead of evaluating the work system and identifying any weaknesses that can be fixed. Investigation should not be about fixing people. You shouldn't be trying to fix your worker, but you should be trying to look at the real root causes and the system issues and make and strengthen your system so that your workers have less possibility of making a mistake. So comment down below if you feel like you've had to spend a lot of time analyzing human behavior and trying to fix human behavior. And let's see if we can find ways to get out of that. Finally, the bandwagon effect is another bias we see a lot in incident investigations. So the bandwagon effect is when the probability of one investigator adopting a belief about an incident increases because a number of team members who hold the same belief are influencing them. So an important character trait for a great investigator is the ability to stay curious and to collect evidence until that curiosity is satisfied without being heavily influenced by what's going on around you and other opinions and hypotheses and theories that are being thrown out there. These are three types of biases that can derail your investigations. So again, tell us below and share your experiences if you feel that there are times that these biases have popped up in your investigation, and which ones do you see popping up most often? Now that we've talked about a few biases, and there are hundreds of biases that can interfere in our investigations, let's talk a little bit about how we can tame our cognitive biases. That's why we're here, right? So The first suggestion I have on how to tame your cognitive biases, and remember, we can't get rid of them altogether, it's part of the human condition, is to stay curious. And I mentioned that on the last slide. You want to look for information that disproves or counters your current perspective sometimes. This is the opposite of what we typically do, which is to only look for information that proves our perspective. So always stay curious about um, your incident investigations as you move through your investigations. Another way that you can tame your cognitive bias is to improve your emotional intelligence. And we talk about that a lot here at Taproot. We have some trainings developed to help you improve your emotional intelligence. It's not hard to do. You can take a few steps and really improve your emotional quotient, which is your emotional intelligence score. So be more aware of managing your emotions effectively. That is a big thing in having good emotional intelligence. That will keep you from making poor decisions that may occur if you have a very strong bias, because a strong bias can bring up some very strong emotions. So learn a little bit more about emotional intelligence and some tips on managing those emotions so that you can stay clear-headed and make good decisions in your investigations. Finally, when you are doing a root cause analysis, use a root cause analysis system. So there's a big difference between an investigation system and just simply a component of that system, like a root cause analysis technique. So we don't want to be using techniques for investigations. We want to use a system. A root cause system doesn't require development of a hypothesis. For example, the Taproot root cause system minimizes bias by requiring evidence collection to collect those facts. Further, it's a guided system that asks investigators expert questions that they might not have considered otherwise or even thought of otherwise. So um, in this way, a guided system like Taproot can help you because it's like having an expert in your corner asking you those questions that you would have not have thought to ask, because we all do our jobs based on our own experience, right? So when you have a guided system that's helping you and with that expertise built in, you are less likely to go on only what you know, but you can incorporate that expert advice and, you know, tame your cognitive biases. So those are 3 ideas for you to think about today and take away. Tell us down below which one you think is most interesting to you that you would like to begin incorporating in your incident investigations. And to sum it up, whether you are new to incident investigations or are a seasoned investigator, your biases are going to have a big effect on how you're doing your job, and they will undermine your investigation results. So make sure to take steps to tame your biases, and you will dramatically improve the reliability of your investigation results. Thanks for joining me, and please comment down below with any new insights you gained from this presentation or what you'd like to know more of in future presentations.